Hello and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be taking a look at building occupant behaviour and how it can be actively managed to improve the energy efficiency of existing buildings. My name is Stephen Kennett and I look after the Cities and Built Environment portfolio here at 2 Degrees. And to welcome our presenters today, we have Phil Shah, Sustainability Director with Planning Consultants DPP, and Jack Collins, National Energy Manager with property company Telereal Trillium. Each session will last for 15 to 20 minutes, which will leave with around 10 minutes for questions at the end. Before I'd just like to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Just type your question and press send, and we'll wait until the end before answering as many as we can. As an aside, if you should have any technical issues during the presentation, please use the chat box on the hand side to send me a message. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Further delay, I'd like to hand over to Sunil, who'll get us started with today's presentation. Over to you.
Thanks, Stephen. So the purpose of my presentation, what I'll run through today in the next 15-20 minutes or so, is really how you engage the energy consumer. And a lot of this has been discussed for a number of years in terms of a recognition and understanding that a significant amount of energy reduction is achievable and is possible not only from changes to the building fabric, from the technologies themselves that can go in, but also in terms of the individuals and the occupants from within a building, whether it's from an owner-occupied type building or whether it's from a tenanted type of operated building as well. What I'll quickly run through then is why behaviour change is so important and what its increasing importance is as we're starting to get a drive on reducing carbon emissions and energy consumption within buildings. And then also how does that fit into the other changes which are starting to take place within buildings. And we'll run through the approach and process that can be used as a concept methodology to reducing the carbon emissions from behaviour change, and some examples of good practice that has come about as a result of that. What I'm off doing is just a position in terms of where I come from. And a quick introduction to DPP Sustainability. Service that we provide is very much looking at the whole life cycle of properties in the built environment, from the initial briefing stage through the design, the construction stages, and then through the operation stage as well, and finally informing back into the brief. And I think that the two key elements here which does differentiate ourselves is the link between the design and operation and ensuring that there are sustainable performance metrics that enable you to deliver from your detailed design aspirations into your operation itself, but also the feedback loop particularly for an organisation in terms of how it operates its buildings and then how that can link back into its brief and its design stages to deliver a better building for itself. We have offices that operate across the UK, and I've got a snapshot of some of the clients that we do work with, both from a life cycle perspective and also from a behaviour change perspective as well. Sort of the role of behaviours themselves, as mentioned, they've been around for a long while in terms of a recognition of its importance and a challenge that does need to be removed. And Sir Nicholas Stern's report, which came out in October of 2006, identified three key areas if we're going to stabilise CO2 emissions and to avoid or to divert from runaway climate change taking place. This one looks at the carbon pricing through a taxation mechanism, very much placing a price on carbon emissions that result from our day-to-day activities, and arguably that's been well developed now through the EU emissions trading scheme and a variety of other schemes which are starting to place a price at a market rate on carbon itself. The second mechanism was looking at the technology itself and how you could provide seed funding for the technologies to get them through the early stages until they become fully developed and the price comes down from economies of scale. And again, we've seen that through things like feed-in tariffs, the renewable heat incentive as well. The third part which Stern did put forward was how to remove the barriers of behaviour change and how to encourage take-up of energy efficiency measures. And a huge part of this comes with the recognition of reports which have been provided previously from the US EPA, from the UK Environment Agency, from the European Union Environment Agency as well. All of these are looking at roughly around 20 to 25% of carbon emissions can be reduced from existing buildings at a managed cost, and that's over the lifetime of the building itself. And it's therefore how do we encourage the owners of those properties, the occupants of those properties, take up the options of reducing carbon emissions as part of those buildings. And a large proportion of that was a behavioural change that was needed to encourage the take-up of those. And again, from a government perspective, we have mechanisms such as the Green Deal, which is being pushed forward in the UK, and a number of the building regulation mechanisms which are being pursued in support of the Green Deal as well. So there will be knock-on implications to encourage individuals as they have a new building or refurbishment to take up the Green Deal option as well. And why the importance of behaviour change? Predominantly it's because the various other mechanisms, how we use energy within a building, is starting to be managed and starting to be reduced as part of forward legislation. So certainly the regulated emissions, which comes under the building regulations requirements, has been targeted from 2006 through 2010 and every 3 years thereafter, and looking to focus upon getting towards a zero carbon building by 2019 for commercial developments, and for housing stock it will be 3 years earlier at 2016. So what will be left will be your unregulated emissions or emissions which are not cost effective to deal with on site, and therefore you deal with them through off-site measures or through allocated emissions elsewhere. So you have a much reduced amount of regulated emissions coming through. What's also starting to be recognised is the carbon emissions from the materials as well, and from the construction process itself as well. So these are the embodied carbon emissions that you have from a development, and a large number of the major real estate organisations are starting to measure what volume is of these carbon emissions and to start to look at mechanisms that they can reduce them. And again, looking at recycled content materials, looking at different design approaches to be able to reduce that. So it's already high up on the agenda for organisations to tackle those areas. What we've left is the lifestyle element of a building and how the occupants within the building actually use the energy itself. And as a proportion, that amount of lifestyle element is going to increase over time, in part because there is no legal requirement associated with it, and there isn't the same drivers that we have with the embodied carbon elements as well. Over time, without starting to change our actions, the proportion of our lifestyle impacts will increase quite dramatically from its current quarter, so through to almost half of the emissions that are going to be generated from a development. There's been a fair amount of research and understanding that has gone into understanding behavioural change. The slide here provides a summary of the government analysis that took place from the 1010 programme. The 1010 programme itself was launched in May 2010 as part of the 1010 campaign, which was to reduce carbon emissions by 10% throughout 2010. And the entirety of the government building stock achieved an overall reduction in excess of 13% over that 12-month time frame. And the Cabinet Office reviewed the benefits that came out from the exercise and started to capture together if we could start to pursue those behavioural changes, what would that be, and how could we encourage other organisations to achieve the same sorts of savings? And they came out with two key areas that came as a direct result of the 1010 programme. The first part is very much around providing defaults and providing a revised way of how you operate a building as a standardised approach within the building itself. And that was down to the operation of the building itself, so very much down to the building management company, very much down to the facilities managers as well, in terms of how they operate that building itself. So it's changing the temperature settings in terms of the dead bandwidth within the building itself when buildings are being shut down, looking at the core hours of when a building does operate and then shutting down outside of those timeframes. And this is seen as being dramatic reductions or potential reductions in energy consumption around the operational elements of the building, but there was an involvement of the occupants within the building as well in terms of how they behaved within the building itself. And therefore there was a need to communicate with those individuals, there was a need to explain to them why these changes were taking place, but also to get a change in behaviour from the occupants, particularly as you widen dead bands on temperature. There's a need for individuals to be comfortable still to work at slightly colder temperatures and slightly warmer temperatures. The other mechanism which the government put forward was around competitions and a competitive element or a fun element associated with this, and how could you start to use the data and the information through league tables and so on as one mechanism, but also how could you enter into more of a fun element, competition elements, where organisations and maybe even within the same building, different floors are then competing for some prizes that may exist to reduce consumption more than the other floors within the same building, or from one portfolio to another portfolio. And the provision and the use of the data enables that competition and competitive element to take place directly. So in terms of how do we start to get energy conservation into the workplace itself, what we've got here is a cyclical diagram, and we start off at the 12 o'clock as the know your energy profile as the initial point to be able to progress any behavioural change project. Unless you understand what your profile is, and that's your detailed profile, so it's not only the energy consumption from gas, your electricity, perhaps your diesel and any other fuel source as well, but also how that gets consumed on a day-by-day, week-by-week, month-by-month basis. So treating a building as a living and breathing entity, it's starting to understand how your building responds to the various changes that take place within the building itself, and also to the external temperatures in the external environment also. Linked in with that is around developing that compelling message. Why is it that we're looking to change the behaviour on energy? Why is energy so important? And that message is going to be different depending upon the stakeholder that you're talking to. So that for an organisation within a tenanted building, the kind of message that you're providing is going to be different to the building manager or to the organisation who owns the building as an investor. They will have different drivers, but there's still that recognition and need to reduce the carbon emissions. So an investor's major priority is focused towards ensuring a building is let for as long as possible, and therefore by having a tenant in there, the return on the investment is maximised. For a tenant's perspective, what they're looking at is, and one of the mechanisms is a green building, and a green building would also be one with a much reduced carbon emissions associated with it, and therefore that reduced carbon emissions will encourage the tenant to come in. So by talking and having a discussion around energy at both a reduction in consumption and also from being able to let a building more easily, you can have a conversation with both the investor and also with the tenants about the same element, but from very different angles. Putting that into the language of the behaviour elements is going to be critical as part of this. So how do you provide that message again to the individuals within the building, to the facilities managers, to the investor, to get them engaged? And again, it's an understanding of the behaviours that do exist within the organisation, how to target them, and then how to pursue and magnify them to get some change taking place. The rest of it is very much around the process that's involved in this, so creating action plans, understanding what it is that you can deliver, and communicating the successes that then result as part of the exercise. Again, demonstrating to individuals that you've achieved a certain amount and there's still more to come along. And again, it very much goes back to the different behavioural characteristics that we do have for individuals. Some who are very keen, very hungry to progress and to put in place some of these mechanisms. And at the opposite end of the spectrum, you have individuals who really don't get engaged with this subject at all, who don't see the point in energy management at all, and therefore will only change if they absolutely have to, and therefore will act as your bottom rung of the ladder almost. Provided a series of case studies taking us through this cycle where we've worked beforehand through this behavioural cycle. And the first case study is for a global financial organisation, and we're providing services for their UK operations in this context. And our role here is very much around verifying the operations that were taking place between the facilities managers, between the maintenance contractors, and also the organisation who managed the building management system as well. And our role is very much understanding the energy consumption that existed and the behaviours of the building itself, and whether that correlated back within the data from the BMS system, and therefore if there's a discrepancy in there, then how do you close that discrepancy? And the image which I've got here in the bar chart provides some of the data that we captured in terms of the detailed energy consumption that took place within the building, together with the usual half-hour meter readings that we were able to obtain. By understanding the actual raw data itself, we started to work with the facilities management team and with the organisation themselves to start to change some of the operating parameters of the building itself, and we achieved an 11% no-cost saving as a net result of that through improved utilisation of the buildings and the operations, looking at the BMS itself. But also a key mechanism here was a culture change that existed within the many engineers themselves. And that's probably the biggest shift that did occur from this project, was spending time with the engineers, running through different ways of viewing the management of the building, different ways to explain how you can resolve some of the issues that they did come across, and they ended up being our eyes and ears moving forwards on this project, identifying further savings and further discrepancies that did exist within the building. And I guess these were guys who spent 10, 15 years previously managing the buildings and arguably become a bit clouded in their judgments in terms of what they were seeing. So it was a recognition that it wasn't the same things that they were seeing every day. The buildings were living entities and therefore needed to be treated as such. The second case study is then looking at how we collate data and collect it all together in some form of mechanism, and then how we can utilise that data as well. And this is a project which we're doing currently with JLL Jones Lang LaSalle. It's for some of their portfolio of buildings. And this is a snapshot of one of their buildings and the kind of data that we're collecting. We're only collecting the energy and utilities data, so that's the gas, electricity, diesel and water. We're also collecting some of the waste information as well in this kind of format. And it provides some of the raw data and the raw information in terms of the meter readings, a calculation of the consumption, but also on the right-hand side, the visibility in terms of whether there's a carbon increase or decrease that has taken place as a direct comparison to what's happened the previous quarter and also the previous year as well. So it's the detailed mechanisms and information that's being provided in terms of the raw data. So visual check, so the facilities manager and the guys operating in terms of operating the building are able to see very clearly the changes that have been happening. In terms of a mechanism being able to communicate that kind of information, whilst the raw data, the kilowatt hours and so on is very exciting for building engineers, it doesn't generally mean an awful lot for the building occupants who don't really collate together what it actually means in terms of impacts for emissions. So what we do have is a correlation of that kind of data, as this is the front sheet of the spreadsheet. So behind this sits the spreadsheets that are shown in my previous slide, and this shows bar charts and other line graphs, but also some commentary in terms of the carbon which has been saved and a correlation of what that actually means. So the emission associated with the gas is the equivalent of being able to heat a 3-bedroom semi-detached house for 5 years, is the equivalent of the gas that has been used. So there is a quantification and understanding in terms of what that means. And from a behavioural perspective, by engaging with the employees and enabling them to understand actually what the impact that you are having, there's a light bulb moment in terms of a recognition of just how great the impact is, but also can take place to make those reductions as well. So again, the mechanism of this, the communication of success, can both be used as a carrot and a stick, both in terms of being able to push the behaviour change, but also being able to demonstrate where success hasn't been quite as good as perhaps you wanted to achieve. And that very much comes down to how do you define success for your organisation. And the last case study then is a project that we're working on to look at disaggregated 24/7 real-time data on energy. What I mean by that is this is a smart meter in effect, but uses a disaggregated data set to build up your total energy consumption. So on a floor itself within a building, you can tell how much the individual components within the floor itself is using, how much your computer terminals are using, how much your lighting is using, how much your kitchen equipment is using, etc., etc., and to get individual data flows for each of those to see what is being used, when and how. And it provides a much better data set and data source that comes through than a traditional half-hour meter reading. Again, by having the increased data set and information, it enables you to better target some of the savings that can be achieved as a result. In terms of a summary, what we are looking at here, I guess that the primary one is people use energy within buildings, not the buildings themselves, and therefore the behaviour change very much is targeting that lifestyle approach. It's starting to approach the individuals and saying, unless we start to change the behaviours of those individuals themselves, we'll never achieve a long-term reduction in energy consumption that exists within the building itself. And each of these needs to be treated on a building by building or a project by project basis. There isn't a one size that fits all. There isn't a standardised methodology that you can roll out across the board. There are stepping stones and there are tools that can be used to encourage and to profile and to raise these sorts of issues, but they are the stepping stones and the information sources. The direct approach that is taken and how you change behaviour on a particular organisation or a building will vary depending upon the cultures that do exist within the building itself. But the final point is just really towards the end is the assumption that behaviour change has no cost does need to be reviewed, because in order to get engagement, in order to get involvement to people, there is a cost, but it's a non-financial cost in the sense that it is people's time, it's people's efforts that are taking place, and therefore commenting on that, applauding people where successes are taking place is paramount to achieving behaviour change and a reduction in energy consumption. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much. A really interesting overview there of the issues, and also great to see those case studies. I'll hand over to Jack, who's going to talk in detail about a project that he's working on. Over to you, Jack.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes outlining how Telereal Trillium are working with the Department for Work and Pensions, achieving significant reductions in both carbon emissions and costs from its national portfolio offices throughout the UK. DPP is one of the largest departments in government, with currently 1,000 buildings housing 108,000 staff across the country. Most people will be familiar with the Job Centre Plus network of offices. There is virtually at least one of these offices in a major town in the country. We worked very closely and continue to have an excellent working relationship with the DPP's Sustainability and Climate Change team, working over the years on aspects such as a gain share agreement between Telereal Trillium and DWP, a spend save scheme, achieving and retaining the carbon standard mark, and the CRC energy efficiency scheme. The term changing behaviours is used in relation to saving energy. It just is focused on building occupants, but we've ensured that we include all parties who use that building, whether that be DWP staff or partner staff, including maintenance, security, cleaning, the project managers when carrying out life cycle works to ensure we're on site as efficiently as possible. For a few minutes now explaining a bit of background on my company Telereal Trillium. We're UK's largest property companies with over 8,000 properties nationwide, with a company base of private companies, local authorities and central government departments. We have three distinct yet complementary areas. Property services, where we work with occupiers of large complex estates, such as the Department for Work and Pensions and BT, to transform their estates. Investment, where we look for investment opportunities that leverage our financial strength and financing capabilities. And asset management, where we generate value for our customers and shareholders through proactive management of our property portfolio. The numbers involved across the businesses that we look after, BT being far the largest in property terms, with a range of both offices and telephone exchange sites, Department for Work and Pensions a close second. There's a range of clients across the country, each quite differing in terms of services provided. In relation to the DWP estate, we place long-term contracts with service partners such as GSH, who are responsible for all M&E planned and reactive maintenance, with a discrete workforce covering the UK. In the DWP estate, we have centrally based HQ functions, as well as 6 regional hubs housing our FM and project teams, clients, health and safety, and other support functions. We have a relatively small energy and environment team supporting our operational teams, bureau support from Teamwork Energy Bureau Services, who get the normal build validation services and relation of consumption and cost data across DWP and DLA. Just now to the DWP contract specifically. Currently in year 14 of the 20-year PFI contract and year 2 of the second Energy Awareness Programme run across the DWP estate. Know Aware, which stands for Avoid Waste and Reduce Energy. This is an insight into the current greening government commitment targets, which DWP are adhering to. Some may be aware of these targets. Represents for DWP approximately 10% of their greenhouse gas emissions, with the bulk of emissions coming from its office estate. DWP have already made significant reductions in water use, mainly due to a national install some 5 years ago, funded from Spend to Save, of waterless urinals. Consumption is reduced by over 35%, again an earlier government target of 20% by 2020. So reductions to between 4 and 6 cubic metres per person was a particularly challenging target. DWP's carbon management plan has been developed by DWP in liaison with both ourselves and Carbon Trust, and forms an integral part of DWP's approach to sustainable and climate change, and supports their continuing accreditation of the department to the Carbon Trust standard. Delighted to achieve such a positive result last year across the DWP estate, following the Coalition Government's 10 Challenge, as well as DWP winning the prize for best performing Whitehall HQ building House in October 2010. We've had a fairly unique approach on Spend to Save investment, resulting in a no risk and no cost to DWP themselves. We identify potential energy saving solutions. We make business cases for DWP approval and then implement the projects, recovering our investment from the accruing savings, which are on a 50-50 basis. One project which is outside this funding arrangement, CHP install at Quay House, a 23,000 square foot site in Leeds. This was funded by the government Salix Fund, but was successfully project managed by Telereal Trillium and GH. We enter a new phase of our Spend to Save arrangements with DWP, and following conclusions of a restructured approach, we hope to be moving forward on a raft of low carbon technologies, including installation of voltage optimization and variable speed drives, as well as lower level site specific energy saving solutions. LICO works improve the efficiency of our building, whether it involves replacing an old boiler with a new efficient boiler, a roof with new insulation, or replacing single glazing with double glazing. Energy life cycle projects delivered across the DWP estate in 2009-2010 by Telereal Trillium led an average 4% reduction in energy consumption, and cumulatively the impact is much greater. Just to monitoring and targeting, the key tools we have used in the last 5 years on the DWP portfolio, AMRs, installed in a majority of medium to large sites, cover all three utilities, AMR standing for automatic meter reading equipment. The data being hosted by Stark on their Save Energy online website. This was funded by the Spend to Save arrangement with DWP I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Data loggers provide our FMs as well as GSH and key staff in DWP the hourly data they need to help identify and eliminate waste, cut costs, and change colleagues' behaviour. To one excerpt from the system, Save Energy Online, heating and cooling are two of the biggest contributors to a building's carbon footprint. Practical steps such as setting heating timers correctly and adjusting regularly have made a significant contribution to savings achieved on the DWP estate. AI assists in this task as well as alerting us that a heating system controls may have failed, resulting in heating running constantly, as the graph shows, with being used constantly across that particular week on this site. It was picked up as part of our exception reporting process in the M community, utilising the half-hour data for all the utilities. Investigated by GSH, it was a fault had developed in the heating controls programme of this DWP site, which resolved. Again, can be seen in the graph where the gas consumption comes back to a more regular pattern reflecting the normal occupancy hours of the site. Without AMR, this issue may have gone undetected for some time, increasing both waste and cost for DWP. As most appreciate, carbon management in an office environment is a balance between meeting certain space conditions and keeping occupants comfortable but minimising waste at the same time. The listed in this slide represent the various components which make up Telereal Trillium's approach to saving energy across the DWP estate. Improving housekeeping and ongoing occupant engagement, more targeting, investment as well as training and development. If one example from the list of how we have introduced ideas and actions which have increased people's engagement in saving energy, I would actively share the half-hour data charts from Save Energy Online with only the local GSH maintenance team, but DWP site managers and DWP energy champions as part of their monthly services meeting. One of the biggest challenges we have faced with DWP in the past was the low DWP management at a very senior level, ministerial level, were aware of the organisation's commitments, meeting government targets on saving carbon. Managers at a local level, particularly in the job centre network, were in the main unaware of these commitments. A significant step change in awareness and engagement at this local level came from a set of policy measures set down in a document known as DWP's Carbon Challenge Measures, which was endorsed by the then Permanent Secretary for DWP and its executive team, which was cascaded down through DWP's management chain. This to a significant increase in interest and engagement from Job Centre Plus managers working with their FMs on these key housekeeping measures. The other important aspect that evolved at the same time were DWP energy champions being elected for each site, an excellent interface for our FMs. An example of what the Carbon Challenge measures is highlighted on the screen. These were jointly developed with DWP and ourselves, and guidelines on key housekeeping aspects which would help DWP achieve the Collating Government's 10-10 challenge, but actually remain DWP policy going forward. Our FMs work closely with DWP measures on these lines, which cover things like maximum heating temperatures, minimum cooling temperatures, including rooms, reducing the use of fans and heaters, informal tea points, etc. And I cut and pasted an extract in the slide to illustrate this point. Not like the high definition image, but I think you'll be able to make out a pile of white goods on the FM's BlackBerry, following an amnesty she arranged at one of our Job Centre Plus sites in the northeast of England, just after the carbon measures were issued. And one of the carbon challenge measures involved reviewing heating times at Job Centre Plus offices, which came about as a result of staff working hours aligning with public opening hours, therefore reducing the requirement to heat offices later than required. This was a consultation between our FM and the Job Centre Plus site manager. The FM at DWP's head office in Whitehall, Caxton House, works very closely with the DWP House Committee, representing the various business units within that building. This is minimising plant running out with standard office hours and at weekends, as well as bank holiday weekends. Security staff also assist to ensure lighting in the evenings is extinguished on staff leaving the site. We have gained agreement with GSH that they will carry out an energy audit and BS controls on the medium and large sites as part of the planned maintenance task, thereby ensuring the building controls are fine-tuned to operate as efficiently as possible. Just as celebrating success, a key aspect of any energy-saving progress is letting people know what impact their actions are having in reducing energy consumption and trumpeting success. Circulating formal consumption reports on a regular basis to DWP, GSH and our own managers, we make a point of drawing attention to where reductions have been made and providing positive feedback to that team or individual. Both Trillium and DWP have award schemes in place to recognise and motivate individuals who go a mile. The scheme covers Telereal Trillium staff as well as service partners. Notable cases on both schemes in the last few years have included the SH North East regional team, led by Alec Turnbull, the regional manager at the time, for fantastic savings made in that area in the early days of the RISE campaign and sustained since. Trillium regional energy leads were also recognised for the very valuable contribution these FMs made in motivating their colleagues and spreading best practice. And David Raper, DWP's energy environment champion at Quad House in Leeds, DWP's large site, for his efforts in encouraging staff to save energy and recycle more. And both Telereal Trillium and DWP were delighted to achieve industry recognition over the last few years for the initial programme RISE across the DWP portfolio, launched the initiative to save energy. We use a range of posters and stickers across the DWP estate to feedback to staff, either of an informative style or to nudge them to do the right thing. This is an example of a recent poster we developed to celebrate the success of savings achieved this year. Actually, ongoing challenges ahead. The great success we've achieved and reducing the message cannot be underestimated given the scale of the DWP estate and the many varied priorities both our teams and DWP staff face on a basis. We're also currently discussing how we may financially incentivise GSH going forward, as it will no doubt drive further savings in the future. We look forward to stage 2 of our investment programme, which will sure result in further savings for DWP and Telereal Trillium, and we ensure any works align with DWP's estate's rationalisation programme, which is currently underway. Duncan Smith, as you may be aware, is currently involved in a root and branch review of the benefits system at DWP, which may or may not affect the DWP's estate, but Telereal Trillium will ensure that DWP's property requirements are met and that DWP continue to be seen as one of the low carbon departments in central government. Thank you for listening, and I believe it's now time for the Q&A session.
Thanks a lot for that, Jack, and I love that photo that you used there. It really sort of shows the sort of things people are doing. So we'll go straight into the Q&A session now, and I think, you both mentioned the importance of measuring what you're using, and we've got a couple of questions which have come in around metering. The one is, if your building only has 1 meter, how do you know how much different parts of the building are using? For example, we have network areas in the basement of our buildings that use a lot of energy, but how do we separate this from what our colleagues use? And the other question we've got is, how do you set up a smart metering system? They have a system, HH metering system. I'm not entirely sure what that stands for, but can these be adapted, and how you go about that? I mean, so Neil, I don't know if you maybe want to start off with that question.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the meter in itself, if there's only one meter there, it's relatively simple to install sub-meters within a building itself. There is a cost associated with that, and also some works that goes along with it. The alternative in the system which I was shown, which was the disaggregated approach, effectively uses the sin waves from the electrical currents. So all you need to do is you hook up a couple of clips onto your electricity supply that comes into a floor. So there's no engineering works and there's no other works that are required as part of that. And you then hook that up to a mini BMS onto a computer, and that provides you with your energy profile for that floor in itself. Again, for the kit and equipment itself, there is a cost, but there's no inherent building works that are then necessary. What your option then is whether you want long-term data and information, in which case a sub-metering system may be more appropriate, or if you're looking at understanding your profile consumption on a point-in-time basis, so on for a month at a time or for a few weeks at a time, you could be using the disaggregated approach instead to help to collect that data and then move on to the next floor. So it's not a long-term measurement approach as part of that. In terms of the whether you can move up from a half-hour meter systems up to a smart meter system, the technology themselves are different. So there would need to be a purchasing. So it's down to the type of data which is being collected and how that's being pulsed through. So the two systems are different. I don't believe that there's a mechanism to be able to move from half-hour data systems through to the smart metering information that does get provided. So that may be more of a capital program that's involved in transferring from one to the other.
Great, thanks, Nick. Jack, we've got a sort of follow-on question to those two also, and someone's asking how much metering do you need to install, and also can you phase the metering that you're installing?
I suppose it depends on which supplier we're talking about. We have tried to install in the medium to large sites. We have installed gas, water, and electric on the medium to large sites, and if it's a particularly large site, on a couple of supplies, if it's electric or gas. Our selection was based on tariff savings that DWP would accrue from installing electricity smart meters. And that kind of paid for the other smart meters which were installed on gas and water.
Thanks, Jack. And I think someone's just asking to clarify something. Is a AMR meter the same as a smart meter?
There are differences in terms of the technology and where the signals go. With the intellectual property sector, our experience in DWP is that the difference is electric, the data is going back to the supply company, the electricity supply company, bill the customer. For gas, we're not there yet. We have 450 supplies across DWP with smart meters on, or I should say AMR on. They're not quite smart in that they cannot send back these pulses association to and data consumption to the suppliers, but we are trying to circumvent that with drop-down data files from Well, and they're sending those to DWP's current gas supplier, and they're being used for billing. So we're kind of converting an AMR into a smart meter in a very crude way, just by sending the data through to the suppliers as for our terms as customer reads from that sense. Similar with water. The use of water loggers is you know what's happening out of hours. You know when you've sprung a leak or an overflow because you can see that immediately on the reports that you can view on any web-based system. water particularly useful these days when talk of droughts in south of England, east, water shortages. So very important that we're able to manage DWP's water use through the water AMRs. But again, they're not smart meters. The only one that you could call as smart is on the electricity side.
Great, thanks a lot for that, Jack. So moving on now, Sunil, I'm not sure if you want to take a question, but do you have any suggestions on how to open up the dialogue between landlords and tenants around behaviour change? And are there any mechanisms or regulations which you could help use to leverage this?
Yes, it's the $64,000 question, isn't it? There's a number of mechanisms that are in place. Probably one of the most well known is the green lease type of approach, which has come out from Australia in the 1990s, and it's mandated for a number of public sector buildings to have a green lease type approach. Green lease in this sense isn't part of the formal lease, it's an associated element, and effectively it's a building specific environment management system that gives roles and responsibilities between tenants and between the landlord in terms of what they're going to do and how you're going to share the successes as well as the activities to achieve those savings and those performance metrics. The lease approach really hasn't picked up too much in the UK, and even modified versions of it, memorandum of understandings or voluntary mechanisms haven't really picked up. And in parts that's because energy hasn't yet been seen as a driver for private landlords, both in terms of its cost and also for its risk implications. It's an unfortunate position that we're in is in a multi-tenanted building where you've got a number of tenants who have different opinions on energy consumption. Unless all of those tenants come together with a single view on energy management and about reducing the amount of energy that's being consumed, a landlord is unlikely to be progressive and to start to make changes that are happening. What we also see is some landlords are willing to make changes, the likes of the Land Securities and the British Lands and the Hammersons of this world do have programs in place where they will listen to tenants, but they do require the bulk of the tenants to actually come together in this form of voluntary agreement to start to progress in any of these areas. But if that does happen, then memorandum of understandings or green leases provides a fantastic mechanism to be able to push through some of these behavioural change aspects and some of these reduction mechanisms.
Great, thanks, Sunil. Jack, we've got another question here which I'm not sure if you can help with. But ultimately, who's been doing the communication with the tenants and the managers? Is it the FM team who are running the building? Or you also kind of get the human resources and managers of the tenants involved also to spread the message amongst the occupiers?
I think it's a joint approach. Again, it's collaboration between the DWP climate change team, sustainability and climate change team, who have a ream of resources on their DWP intranet site. Has got a lot of updates and communication on it with DWP staff occupants themselves. We also provide information through the firm, as you mentioned. We have regular meetings with the manager, so now start to have dialogue with the DWP Energy Champion. So we have various means spreading the message on the site. Typically, it's a notice board with up-to-date information on energy saving and recycling targets having been met and progress. But as I mentioned earlier, DWP have their own intranet system with resources and information pertaining to energy saving and carbon management. on that system as well.
Great.
So it's a kind of joint approach, I think.
Thanks. Neil, another question here is, do financial incentives work in the long term? I think what they mean by that probably is financial incentives for the departments with building.
Yeah, I mean, from a department perspective, having ownership on the energy bill, if that was the question, does work, because that provides that direct driver and, again, a recognition of what is happening. Therefore, there's a direct benefit in savings being made. And the same would go if you have a multi-tenanted building and the landlord pays the energy bill versus the tenant paying the energy bill. If you don't own the energy bit itself, then effectively what it's saying is we'd like you to put forward a lot of effort and time to make a series of reductions, but you're not actually going to see any of the benefits of that directly yourself, because you're not going to have any financial benefits as a net result. There's going to be no reduction on your energy budget as a result, and so on. So unless you can tie those two together and give some tangible financial performance there, then losing one of the key strands that you can leverage off.
Thanks. We're almost coming up to the end of our hour now, but I've got time for a couple more questions. Just one here. For a large company who has already made the big changes, how do you suggest employee engagement could be increased for the small changes? For example, encouraging staff to turn off monitors and PCs and that type of thing.
But I think, again, a joint approach. I think the DWP, having gone for nominations for local energy wardens on site, has been a great help, because FMs can't be on site all the time, because they may have a dozen or 15 properties to look after. So the fact that there is an on-site DPP energy champion is someone who can liaise with colleagues on ensuring all the right behaviours are taken up, switching lights off when it's bright enough, turning monitors off, etc. Although there are other vehicles like posters and stickers that we can use to help DWP change the staff behaviour, I think the nomination of these individuals, I think there's something like 900 individuals out there now, and we're actively encouraging our FMs to contact and have regular dialogue, because these people can work with their colleagues on site. They work for the same organisation, DWP. So I think that they're pretty key in that aspect. And also I think managers want to talk as well, and demonstrating behaviours and leading by example.
Great, Jack. So final question, Neil. Someone's asking any suggestions on how to create a compelling message. I think that was one of the things you mentioned in your presentation. How do you go about communicating it, especially to engage those people who maybe aren't as interested in energy saving as others? Yeah,
okay. In terms of the compelling message, in part that comes down to the culture that does exist within the organisation, and therefore also who makes that kind of comment. And I think the Government 1010 programme is a fantastic example of that, where a number of government departments, whilst they've had targets on energy reduction and energy efficiency through previous SOGI targets that have existed, haven't really made an awful lot of headway in those changes. With the Prime Minister coming along, given a mandate and a very clear signal in terms of the reductions that had to take place, and putting the ownership upon Secretary of State and also the lead civil servants for that department, there's a very clear message of how that had to be delivered in those departments, and they successfully overachieved on that target itself. You can argue that what was different between David Cameron's statements and comments and the mechanism that took place there versus the plethora of other commitments that had been made historically around carbon savings. And fundamentally it was down to something that was very clear, something that enabled the end objectives to be defined at a local level, depending on how they operate, but also it came from the right person who made that as a commitment, and they tasked the right people to make those changes. So I think from a compelling message perspective, it is the right person needs to be making the statement in itself, and that will again vary from an organisation by organisation perspective. But what you're trying to achieve has got to be in line with the culture that exists within the organisation, and again that will vary depending on whether it's cost driven, whether it's performance driven, or whether it's more societal and softer metrics that are in place. I think combine those two together and you've got something fairly powerful that the vast majority of individuals will respond to. How do you tackle the hard to reach people? In one sense, you shouldn't spend all of your time focused upon the 1 or 2% of individuals that are limiting progress and don't want to move. There's an element of peer pressure that does also exist in pushing these individuals along. So I don't think there should be a huge amount of time and effort spent, but you can use them as a good check in terms of they're almost your devil's advocates to the messages that you're putting forward.
Thank you. So that's all we have time for today. I'd like to thank Sunil and Jack for their time, and also for getting through so many questions, and also thank everyone who joined us for the webinar. Recording and the presentation slides will be archived on the 2 Degrees platform. And I'd like to remind you that you can download a copy of our latest 2 Degrees Essentials guide from the site, which was an introduction to behaviour change. So I hope you found today informative and useful, and that you'll be able to join us for another webinar soon. Thank you.